It was going to be about huevos divorciados. Have you ever had those?
No.
It's like huevos rancheros, but instead of just ranchero sauce, you have also, I think, a salsa verde. It's like the greens and the blacks, but the greens and the reds.
Oh my God.
What?
The dance of the salsas.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Maester Monthly, your favorite pseudo-monthly podcast hosted by the moderators of the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. Now, before we begin, this podcast is spoilers extended, which means that material from the Winds of Winter sample chapters and the Game of Thrones TV show is fair game. You have been warned. I am one of your hosts, Michael, also known as Bookshelf Stud.
I am another one of your hosts, Eliana, also known as Glass Table Girl.
And my name is Jeff. I am better known as Brenna Beefish, and I am happy to be back with the Maester Monthly podcast. And it's a pleasure to be back. Good to see you guys.
Ah, man, it has been a hot minute.
It has been, yeah. I think the last episode I did was back in season 7, I want to say.
Oh, yeah.
The Loot Train Battle, or the whatever the episode was actually called.
That's actually like a really good episode, though.
Of TV.
I still really like that episode.
Yeah.
It's the best episode since season 4. I think we can all agree on that. Or
Yeah.
maybe at least since Hard Home.
No, I thought episode 1 was a good episode. Episode 1, season 7.
Yeah.
That one was
The
solid.
Red Woman? I was at season 6, episode 1.
No. This one was, I forgot.
Dragonstone?
Yeah, Dragonstone. It was good.
Yeah.
That's right.
Solid ending.
Well, as always, we will be coming at you with the hottest catches and the nicest takes, or vice versa. But before we dive into the subreddit highlights, as always, we're going to get started with an intro question. This one comes to us from a user on the subreddit several months ago, like a while ago, actually, from user Old Man of the Mountain, who asked on the subreddit, in your opinion, what are some Aswaf characters that receive fandom sympathies that really shouldn't be sympathized with? And they did misspell shouldn't, so I pronounced it the way they spelled it. So what are some characters in the story who you think get a little too much sympathy from the fandom?
I think for me, the one that I feel like gets an inordinate amount of sympathy, or maybe not sympathy is the wrong word, but gets an inordinate amount of praise, is the character of Sir Kevin of House Lannister. So this guy, I feel like, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like every 2 to 3 months we have this same sort of post where Kevin Lannister is spitting straight fire. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
He's like talking down to Cersei and to Jaime, and he's got all these like lines that he's throwing against them. It's like, boom, his mixtape is hot.
That's right.
But then when you like get to the character of who Kevin Lannister is, and even when you evaluate his like burns that he gives to Cersei, they're all really misogynistic burns against Cersei. Like, they're not like, oh, this person's actually, I mean, Cersei's bad, but like he focuses on not Cersei's badness, but the fact that she's a woman as the reason why he feels the need to kind of like crush her, so to speak. And then when you actually like talk about his conduct, you know, in the War of the Five Kings, you have that at the end of the Game of Thrones, Tywin Lannister gives orders that the Riverlands need to be burned from the God's Eye to the Blackwater, something like that. So all on the Riverlands, he wants it to be burned. And Kevin Lannister's response is, "It shall be done, my lord." And then, you know, we also have, you know, quite a bit of evidence too that Kevin Lannister was the one who was behind Cersei's Walk of Shame. And these are reasons why I don't feel like Kevin Lannister is really worth a lot of sympathy. Like, perhaps he wasn't the one giving the order, but to me, he kind of seems to be the good German, the type of German officer from World War II who, it wasn't me who ordered the Holocaust. I was just taking orders from my superior officers, from those in high command.
Wow, we Godwin's Law real fast.
We really did.
0 to 100. Yeah.
But
no, it's definitely a Nuremberg defense for Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like, he's like the guy, though, that the reason why we go back to Nazism so quickly is because I feel like that George has kind of built a lot of that into his character and to who he is as a person, that he's, yeah, sure, he has a few sick burns against Cersei Lannister, but a lot of those sick burns are in the context of the Lannisters winning the War of the Five Kings in quotation marks in the worst possible horrific way, and Kevin Lannister playing a pivotal role in winning extraordinarily unjustly and extraordinarily morally questionably, at the very least, if not totally immoral. So I think that Kevin Lannister is the guy that I feel like should not receive the same sort of like, oh, this guy's so awesome, look at how awesome he is dropping these burns, because he's not only dropping burns against Cersei and Jaime in A Feast for Crows, he's also the guy that's burning villagers and murdering villagers in the War of the Five Kings too. So that's my take on Kevin and why he doesn't deserve your sympathy.
Wow, well done.
That was
with
some
that burn double
super
entendre.
hot fire.
Yeah, I'm proud of you, Jeff.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
No, it's true though. There is that recurring post that like we've all seen dozens of times every 2 months, like you said. Kevin Lannister is so funny.
Right.
He has his mother and his father too, and everyone just loses their minds. Yeah. Overrated. Canceled.
Canceled. Kevin Lannister is canceled.
That's
Canceled Lannister.
right. Cancel Lannister.
That's actually his son. Actually, I kind of like Lancel.
Cancel Lannister is a great joke though. So
It is a fantastic joke. We'll have to use that, yeah. What about you? Who wants to go next?
Michael.
I've thought about this really, really hard for the past 30 seconds or so, and I think that I'm gonna go with Courtney Penrose.
Wow.
Wow, that is fire. I am taken aback. I am feeling attacked right now.
Yeah, so Courtney Penrose, I feel like Kevin, he gets a lot of the kind of fandom love for his, sick one-liner he drops when Stannis comes to take Storm's End, and Courtney's like, remember the name of this castle, sir, and everyone just, loses their minds. But Courtney Penrose, if Stannis hadn't been able to quickly resolve that situation, that could have been disastrous for everyone involved. It gives the Lannisters more time to rally around King's Landing, which puts Stannis and Storm's End in a really precarious position. Because it doesn't necessarily... Courtney wasn't doing it because he was a Lannister loyalist. He was doing it for Renly, which... Yeah. I mean, it would have been a disaster if, the hero emperor, the god emperor himself hadn't managed to drone strike Courtney off a tower. But I don't know. I think it's one of those things where people read the surface and they're like, Courtney Penrose is so cool, but he's not.
I think also too, when you get into it, at that point in the story in A Clash of Kings, I think people read back into events from Clash with the context of Storm in mind. So in the context of A Storm of Swords, we know that Melisandre has convinced and eventually convinces Stannis that he needs to burn Edric Storm in order to raise stone dragons. But that's not an evidence in A Clash of Kings. Instead, Stannis wants Edric Storm not to burn him to R'hllor, but he needs him in order to show that Joffrey and Tommen and Myrcella are all bastards born of incest. He needs that kind of physical proof of being like, this is Robert's acknowledged bastard through Delaena Florent. And, I think that fans be like, oh, well, obviously Stannis wants this kid to to burn him. Well, that's not actually in evidence at that point. So what is Courtney doing? Why is he defending Storm's End? He makes a big stink about Edric Storm, but he has no reason to believe that this kid is in extraordinary danger from Melisandre and from R'hllor. Absolutely. That only comes later in the story. So it's almost like I think Davos puts it really well to Stannis in Clash, where he talks about that this guy he's got nothing left, so he's basically throwing his life away, and he's also throwing the lives away of the men at Storm's End. And you have to talk about too. I mean, I am a Stannis defender in some senses. I don't think he's perfect by any stretch.
A Stannerman, yeah.
A Stannerman, so to speak. But the terms that Stannis but the terms that Stannis gives to the garrison is pretty good. He's like, yeah, you can join me if you want to. You don't have to join me. Really, all you need to do is you can walk out of here with your arms. You can go back to your homes. You can join my army. You can do whatever you want. I just need your pack animals. And that's really all and the castle itself. That's all Stannis needs here. So Courtney's defiance is just in a vacuum is really kind of fun, and he's spitting straight fire. But when you consider the larger context, you're like, wait, what is he actually doing here? What is he hoping to accomplish? And then of course you get some more context later on where he's sending letters to King's Landing. He's sending letters to Robb Stark being like, I will serve anyone who will help me out here at Storm's End. So there's no real ideological cause there besides his own vanity, really.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that I think you could potentially see Courtney Penrose as perhaps trying to defend Edric Storm, because we do have a precedent. Like, while we know that Stannis wasn't necessarily seriously considering burning Edric Storm until Storm, Clash opens, right? Does Clash open with him? He's not burning people yet, but there are burnings. And of course, because I am catching up on your podcast episodes, Jeff, the discussion of how Ned Stark also thinks that, hey, Stannis is the kind of person who would kill Lannister bastards. And so the fact that people think this of Stannis, and also we have a precedent of Robert's other bastards being in danger and dying at the behest of Cersei, of course, I can see why Courtney Penrose, and why fans might be reading that into Courtney Penrose, him defending Edric.
Mm.
I don't know that it's like explicit, but I think that it's not. I think that it is a subtext that is there.
Yeah, the thing is, like, about Stannis, like, at that point, he hasn't burned anyone. In fact, he doesn't burn anyone until we get to all the way to the end of A Storm of Swords, where he allows Melisandre to burn Alistair Florent. But even in that case, the burning of Alistair Florent wasn't, in Stannis' mind, seemingly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't in the context of him being an unbeliever, the way it's kind of framed in the show. The context of burning Alistair Florent was for his treason, in order to try and sell Shireen off to the the Baratheons of King's Landing, and to marry Tom and Baratheon in order to end the war that way. So that's the context there. But I get what you're saying, in that Stannis has a hard reputation.
He's got a bad public image, is what I'm trying to say. He's got a bad reputation, even if he's not doing that. He's the kind of person people look at and they're like, I could see that guy burning his nephew. You know what I mean?
He's coming off the heels of having killed Renly. Like, I mean, if you are Courtney Penrose, you could see, like, oh, whoa, this guy could do anything. He's liable to do whatever. Like, it's a little irrational. And Courtney is a dumbass, but I'm not saying
Stannis would at that point. I'm just saying that that's his public image. He needs a new PR team.
He sure does. That poor guy. Yeah. Well, that's a lot about Courtney Penrose. So, Eliana, who do you think gets a good rep? Who shouldn't?
I think that this character is really popular. And, speaking of one of the Baratheons and the Baratheons in general in Storm's End, while we're here and fathering bastards, Robert Baratheon.
Oh.
The king? This is treason.
It is treason. Actually, technically, it would be, speaking ill of the king is in fact considered treason in this kind of law system, because the laws weren't great. But I get it. He's like sad, and Ned thinks pretty well of him. Mm-hmm. But it's just like, Robert, you're a grown man. Grow the fuck up, dog.
Well, I also think, like, for Robert too, like, when we meet him in a Game of Thrones, like, he's a big man, he's jolly, he's laughing, he's got his jokes. But yeah, he is a really sad man, even as Ned gets to reacquaint himself with Robert throughout a Game of Thrones. But then when you get some more context, like going through, you've got Stannis relating the story of how one time Joffrey cut open a kitten and Robert hit him so hard that Stannis thought that he had killed Joffrey. Yeah. That's like very, very serious child abuse there. And then when you get into the relationship between Cersei and Robert, which does get some allusions to it in Game, Clash, and Storm, but gets some more reveals in A Feast for Crows, where you find out that Robert was sexually assaulting Cersei throughout their marriage, was treating her harshly, was really shaming her more than anything else too, with all the bastards that he was fathering throughout Westeros. I mean, I not to be like too sympathetic to Cersei. I mean, she's got her own villainous qualities to her as well. But what Robert did to Cersei is inexcusable. I mean, I think there's no way that you can look at Robert's treatment of Cersei and be like, well, it makes sense, because all the actions that Robert does with Cersei beating her, sexually assaulting her, doing all of these things, they're not in the context of like Cersei's villainy. They're almost all in the context of Robert's selfishness, his drunkenness, the way that he actually is, the way this kind of the sadness emanates off him, that he becomes this not just sad character, kind of a sad boy, but he becomes abusive as a result of this kind of internalized sadness he took from the end of Robert's Rebellion. And I mean, we had talked about that. I know you guys had talked about this in the Girls Gone Canon podcast about how all these characters from Robert's Rebellion are so scarred from their experiences there. They're all like, they all have extraordinary arrested development from that, and that a lot of them are still living in the same mindset they were when they were 17 or 18 years old. But yeah, Robert, you're 35 now. You're the same age that I am. Like, you can't live in the past. You know, I would never want to be where I am. Like, yeah, I'm 18-year-old version of me. I would never want to meet that guy. You know, you have to mature and wise up and grow up, and that's important for Robert. But instead, he becomes an abusive, kind of selfish, drunken, fat asshole.
It's very true, and I mean, I think there's a lot of fandom sympathy for him too, which is really the core of it. I mean, would you agree with that, Eliana? Like,
I think there is, and I'm seeing like this running thread now that I think about it between all three of our characters and where the sympathy comes from for them. It's that a lot of them have really fun lines, and I think ultimately people connect with characters that make them laugh, and it almost makes you overlook, like, wait, that's not okay.
That's right.
And yeah. I think that that's something that George does really well, maybe too well, where he sort of tries to portray greatness in characters through moments of like these great singers, or moments of what's considered quote unquote badassery, right? Through physical like acts, through martial prowess. You see it happen with characters like Victarion. But like, there's a part of you that's like, I mean, Victarion's just too dumb to like know anything. But
well, I mean, it's the whole prologue thing, right? With Waymar, right?
True.
Like he's a jerk, and he sucks, but then he doesn't suck, and that's gray.
Well, I mean, like the elephant in the room though is also a character like Tyrion, right? I mean, he's the guy that is seemingly very, very gray, so to speak. But you know, we were just covering Tyrion 7 from A Game of Thrones, where Tyrion finally confronts Tywin Lannister, his father, and the aspect about that makes him so sympathetic is that he's like under this like withering gaze of his father, and he's being lobbed all of these like sabot rounds against him. Like, Tywin's like, I didn't go to war for you. I went to war for the because Lannister honor was at stake. And so you like sympathize with Tyrion because he's the underdog there. But at the same time, like Tyrion in that chapter is like, it's like, I cannot wait until I can lay waste to the Vale and destroy the Vale for all the stuff they've done to me when Catelyn Stark took me prisoner. And no doubt Tyrion has a bit of reason for wanting to lay waste to the Vale, but you also have to consider, like, you've got like hundreds of thousands of civilians that'll be caught in the crossfire between any destruction of the Vale and Tyrion's goal in order to bring the Vale Lords down to the level that he feels that they deserve after their treatment of him.
I think that's something that prior to recording we were talking about. Like, I think that the reason why Tyrion's not as good of a character as a lot of people think he is, and I think that since book 5 has taken so long to come out, a lot of that conversation around Tyrion's actions and greatness as a character has deepened, which is good. There's like much more nuanced takes on that, but I think that Tyrion, same as characters like Cersei, it's hard to, for me personally, feel unsympathetic towards them, even though like what Tyrion's saying is horrible and terrible, but because there's so much of the system that's stacked against them, right? The system's not stacked against Robert. The system is not stacked against Kevin. It's not stacked against like Courtney Penrose necessarily, but it is against someone like Tyrion, and that's what makes their compulsions of wanting to have revenge on a world that has wronged them so understandable. It's why Mance believes Jon when Jon tells him that he's joining the wildlings because did you see where they sat the bastard? We know that's not why Jon's doing it, but that's why Mance believes him.
That's a great point. Yeah,
that's what highlights the goodness of characters like Sam and Jon. Like, Sam has things stacked against him because of his dad, but like otherwise not really. And Jon, you know, is somewhere in the middle, and as he comes to realize in the first book, but like that they don't let the things that they face waver their sense of morality.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I mean, I think that's really true too. And I think also think we might have a skewed perspective as readers, because almost all of the point of view characters beyond a few of your prologues and Davos Seaworth to a lesser extent are all members of the noble class, right? Mm-hmm. So Jon, even though he is at a disadvantage in, the Stark household and at Winterfell, and even when he gets up to the Wall, he has a significant amount of relative privilege compared to the vast majority of people that he sees and encounters at the Wall. And I think that's a fascinating study that Martin undertakes for Jon's arc, especially in A Game of Thrones, is that Jon is suddenly exposed to the fact that, he had a lot of things that were going against him at Winterfell, but not compared to these guys who were being dragged against their will up to the Wall and being forced into service in the Night's Watch. It is a military penal colony for a lot of these guys. This is not the noble calling that Jon has believed it to be. And to Jon's credit, and what makes him such a good and noble character, especially in A Game of Thrones, is that he recognizes this and tries to do better for himself, and also tries to better those around him to make them kind of a same sort of par and make them co-equals to him and his service up at the Wall.
Yeah, as opposed to when Tyrion is placed in a similar position, right? He's just well, this sucks. What we should have done is poisoned all the wells.
Right.
I was that's an interesting conclusion to draw from all of that, Tyrion.
What a hot take from
Yeah,
Tyrion.
that is a hot take.
Yeah. I think that's what we're discovering, is that there's some toxic hot takes in the Asswaff fan favorite department.
From the fan favorites, not from
Yeah,
us.
exactly.
We are innocent. We deserve sympathy.
Of course.
We're sympathetic characters.
That's right.
In your ears.
I'm not a gray character. I'm actually a wholly good character. I don't know if you guys knew that.
You are revived. You have died.
Don't tell me you guys haven't put your the other moderators in the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit made them as characters in a Song of Ice and Fire, right?
I mean, we've done those threads though on Reddit, the casting, if that's what.
Yeah, that's true. Those are fun threads. So if anyone's listening to this, bring that back up, resurrect that thread again. I'd love to see another version of that again. Yeah. Especially as the show season comes around, we'll get all these new folks coming onto the subreddit, which is going to be a lot of fun.
That's true. So once again, frequent frequent appearer on Maester Monthly, Bale Bard, with a post called Varys the Magician. And this post is an interesting take on Varys as sort of an accidental sorcerer. The idea being that he really does have this origin story where he hates magic because it was a really traumatic experience for him. But that in gaining his power as the Master of Whisperers and as this scion of knowledge, he has replicated some of these things. He has mutilated children to get his power. And it might not be quote-unquote magic, but that doesn't mean he hasn't done horrible, horrible things, all for the sake of accessing knowledge and power that he shouldn't otherwise be allowed to access. It's a really interesting post. There is also some discussion then that gets edited in from the comments about how Varys might actually literally be a magician, even if it is unintentionally, he may genuinely be doing some blood magic. But it's a really interesting discussion in the comments as well. And I'm not just saying that because I had the top comment. It's a really interesting conversation about what characters do for power in the series, what they are willing to do to get power. I don't know. I really liked this post a lot. Maybe it's just because I'm a Bale Bard brand loyalist, but what did you guys think? Yeah, I stand Bale Bard.
I like this post a lot too. I think one of the most interesting aspects that George talks about in A Song of Ice and Fire and relates to is that how often people become the things that they hate. And Varys is a really good example of this, in that you have him reacting so strongly against magic and against what was done to him in a seeming blood magic ritual back before he came to Westeros, and how that has had such a negative impact on him. And to be fair, you always have to couch the things that Varys says in a greater context of his greater conspiracy here. So when he's talking about how he doesn't want Stannis to come into power because he's bringing a red witch with him that'll bring magic into the fold here, you got to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because we do have to recognize that Varys has a long-standing plan in order to seat young Griff on the Iron Throne, and having Stannis in the way would make that task extraordinarily difficult, as opposed to having a character like Cersei, Joffrey, and Tommen on the throne would be less difficult for Aegon to take the Iron Throne. That being said, though, I think that this post does a really good job of showing us how Varys is acting very much like that wizard or like that sorcerer that he encountered in his youth, and that seemingly this blood magic ritual, a voice called out from the magic itself when his manhood was being burned. That's seemingly the magician there was attempting to access secret knowledge and secret wisdom. And what is Varys doing throughout the entire story but seemingly getting all the secret knowledge and wisdom here? We have, and this is just fresh in my mind because I was reading this last night, but at Game of Thrones Eddard 15, Ned's final chapter, you find out that Varys was listening into Ned and Littlefinger's conversation the entire time, where Littlefinger was telling Ned that, we should just seat Joffrey on the Iron Throne, and if we have to, we can remove him later on. And Ned is like, you really are a sorcerer? Like, this is outstanding. Like, how'd you find that out? It's impossible for you to know. Now, I mean, like, readers know, if you've read all the way through at least A Storm of Swords, that Varys is likely using his little birds and inserting them through the tunnels and into the walls of the Red Keep itself. So that's the way he's accessing this magic. But it's the same sort of thematic, if not actual counterbalance, so to speak, of where Varys is acting very much like the magician, accessing secret knowledge, and very much becoming the thing that he hates, and becoming a very magical type of character.
Yeah, it's very much that idea of that cyclical nature within A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not just the myths and legends. We were talking earlier about Cersei and how she does a lot of bad things. A lot of the bad things that we see her do in Feast are things that were done unto her by Robert, and she's replicating those, and Varys does that. So I think that this is like such a great argument. I appreciate that Bael Bard does argue the other side based on comments that were saying that maybe Varys is intentionally doing blood magic, and I think that that's an interesting idea, but I personally am just much more interested in character arcs. I find that compelling, but I do think that it's noble of Bael Bard to explore that other side of, Varys doing blood magic unknowingly or knowingly through the children, and thus perpetuating that cycle of violence on one part, and that was done unto him knowingly for like that power, but also perhaps unknowingly, as they're saying, if it is in fact magic.
I think you're right. I mean, it was good, like you said, of Bael Bard to bring in the other side a little bit there. But I think it's true that what's really important is the I don't know, metaphorical side of it. And speaking to that cycle of violence, that's something that comes up a lot, and I think is something that will also be kind of connected to Bran. It'll be interesting to draw parallels with Bran and Varys in this light, I think, with the idea of the birds as the access to knowledge, and then the things that you have to do to access that knowledge, assuming there's some sort of Trojan pasty kind of sacrifice that, Bran might be doing the magical version of what Varys is doing, and maybe Bloodraven did a little bit of both, and in both instances, it's the horrible, horrible things, just awful, unspeakable things that have to be done, all for the sake of getting this secret access, this early access, alpha information.
And I mean,
getting the leaked episodes.
We were talking about Edric Storm also earlier and bringing it back. Like, it brings into question that same idea. If Varys is willing to kill, Bael Bard throws out there a number, 50 children, and that's just our starting number. That's not even the last one, okay?
Right.
Yep.
There were kids before that. There are going to be kids after that. Like, how noble is your cause, really? How noble is the king that you wish to seat if you are willing to mutilate and then sacrifice these children in the name of your cause?
Absolutely, yeah. If your like regime is built on dead children, that pretty much makes it illegitimate. Maybe that's just one man's opinion, but you know.
It's not a bad opinion. I mean, I think there's a real thematic throughway through characters like Melisandre and Varys. I mean, where you have these characters who seemingly, in my opinion, it's a little more controversial for Melisandre, but Varys is the type of guy who is willing to do the unseemly, awful, evil things on behalf of a good cause. And in his case, the good cause is putting Aegon onto the Iron Throne. And he's able to create an amount of distance between his actions and good king, noble King Aegon, and that's what makes him much more of a compelling character. It's also makes kind of the whole idea of him setting this kid up over the body of these other children a bit wrong, but I think there's the same idea with Melisandre too, in that a lot of the things that Melisandre does, and I know this is a bit controversial, but I think a lot of the stuff that Melisandre does, she does without Stannis knowing a lot of it. And the reason why she does that is because she's attempting to create this separation between the morally ambiguous / evil things that she does, and then kind of utilizing that to put some space between the king and the actions that she's committing. And I know that can be controversial when you talk about things like, was Stannis the one who was really behind Renly's death, or even behind Sir Courtney Penrose's death? But at the same time, when we see her in A Dance with Dragons, we see a person who is willing to kind of say the things that people want to hear, as well as conceal a lot of information about herself and about what she's really after, and when she's operating up on the wall. And, you know, that's interesting as a story device, but it's also interesting too in that, what is the price of power? What is the price of putting someone onto the Iron Throne? Is it worth one child, 50 children, 100, 10,000, 100,000, a million children? I mean, that's kind of the ethical conversations that A Song of Ice and Fire invariably leads us to consider. For
sure. It's super reminiscent of Tywin, because he lays the bodies on his red cloak below the Iron Throne of Rhaenys and Aegon to hide the blood better, because it's on his red cloak. Like that's such a I don't know, that moment, I think, the red on red kind of disguising things by using your identity and taking that on, doing the dirty things so that the ruling power doesn't have to. That's a super strong through line. And kind of interesting to connect to Melisandre with red, and then Varys with like his costumes, and you know, I feel like you could go for some improv on that for a while.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next post, I just want to point out one comment here. I like it from Rocky Rockington, who is talking about Varys, and he quotes a long line of text, but he says, through Varys' experience as a child, he knows that magic is a real and usable force. And then he relates the story that I was sort of paraphrasing to Tyrion. And then Bael Bard comes back and says, quotes the final line of that story, where Varys says, all I can say for certainty is that he called it and it answered. And this is Varys talking about when his man was put into the fire. And since that day, I have hated magic and all those who practice it. And then Bael continues, him tapping into that power he hates so much would be a very fitting turn of events, seeing how he tapped into slavery and hurting children, other things that he hates. So I think that's a really good discussion that was had here. I think one of the things I really appreciate the most about Bael's posts is that he comes to some interesting conclusions and talks about the thematics here, but he also encourages a lot of conversation in his posts. I think that some posts, the conversation can be a little more lighter, and that's fine. It's totally fine for a certain type of post, and for most posts for that matter. But I also like the in-depth sort of stuff too that we see in a lot of these comments here. We got some excellent disagreements from a poster like Brandy's Bronson here, who talks about his disagreement, and Skull of the Great John, one of our 2018 winners, saying this is so insightful. And yeah, you guys are welcome to read these posts. Well, they'll be on the Reddit post itself. But yeah, as always, the OP is great. But if the comments are awesome, that I think it's a testament to the OP. So kudos to Bael and kudos to all the commenters here.
Is the most important comment here, though, from Double Hawk for Life. It is not a parent comment. It is a child comment nested twice that says, in regards to Michael, he's also a hoot on the Maester Monthly podcast.
Yes.
You uploaded that, didn't you?
I actually did. I just saw it now.
I uploaded it. I was like, he is a hoot.
I'm upvoting that now. If I had seen that before, I would have commented about hooting and hollering, but it's too late now.
No, it's
too late. It's
quite a few days
23 days ago as of recording.
He's gonna know.
That's right. Double Hawk for life. Thank you.
You're a hoot.
You're a mensch.
Our second highlight is from user We Are Not Legion, and the title is a very provocative title. It is "The Show is a Perfect Adaptation." And I'll let everyone marinate in the title here for a second as you guys start to sharpen your knives there, those of you who are more in the book purist line. But then the first line of the post is, if you assume it's all written from Cersei's point of view, here, let me demonstrate. And so then this user goes through about 13 or 14 bullet points talking about how the show, especially in later seasons, is kind of has a Lannister bent-ish, but more than simply a bent. Like the way that certain characters are portrayed are ways that would be sympathetic to the Lannisters. Like, take one here. Tywin really is a tough but fair, pragmatic ruler who only resorts to extreme violence for the greater good. Yeah, that's basically the Lannister talking point to a T right there. And then you have Ned really was a dumb country bumpkin, too stupid to play the Game of Thrones, and whose honor got him killed. Now, that one might be a little more controversial, because I don't, in my opinion, and I don't mean to like just jump into my opinion here, but I don't know the show necessarily portrays that necessarily. I mean, I think you could come away with that watching it, but I don't think that's intentional on the showrunner's parts. And then finally, you got stuff about Loras's reputation tonight is completely overblown. The only thing he's good at is being gay. Only idiots need to rely on things like honor, justice, and loyalty. That's why the dumb Starks could barely get anyone in the North to help their dumb cause. And in that case, they're referring to Jon Snow going around the North after he is resurrected in season 6. And then finally, you have excessive violence and treachery are the real path to power. The North was perfectly content with Bolton rule. Doran Martell was happily subservient to the family that murdered his sister, and the Riverlands apparently didn't give a shit that Tywin set half their lands on fire. Hell, just look at the way the masses cheered for their beloved and totally legitimate Queen Cersei after she bombed the Pope and the Vatican. Realpolitik and wanton brutality all the way. Fuck yeah. So this, as Michael might say, is a very spicy take.
It is. This is a meatball of extreme spice.
But it's good spice, you know?
It is.
It's that good spice.
It's all that spice I need. Yeah, it is. It's definitely provocative, but I don't know. I think it's funny because it is true. The show makes maybe some different arguments, or at least seems to make some different arguments than the books do, or at least presents things in a different light. And that light does happen to line up with like Cersei and her delusions. I particularly liked Bullet 2, which was Cersei really is a hyper competent political genius who outclasses even Tywin, according to Tycho Nestoris. Yeah, I don't know. It was provocative, but I've valued it because it was painfully accurate. As one commenter, Equitum4, said, I came ready to disagree, but yeah, you're pretty right.
It's just so funny. Like, it's just so cleverly laid out. Like, wow, it really is. And I mean, the show really is playing up Cersei as, you know, as We Are Not Legion says, a hyper competent political genius who is, and then later on, using that wanton brutality. Like, they are really framing that as this is Cersei's path to success.
Yeah. There's a line in a comment further down that's the books are anti-war and anti-revenge. The show is definitely not, which I think is a strong statement about the books, but I think that is true. The show is definitely not anti-war and anti-revenge. Like,
I think it's really hard to be anti-war in a show and have it be popular. I was having this conversation, not to get like super political here, but I was having a conversation with some folks on Twitter about how in movies, like neoconservatism is like kind of portrayed as like always like the kind of thing that you see in movies, and so to speak, like the good guys going in blazing with their guns to save the bad people, to save the people they need to save from the bad guys, sort of things. Like that kind of mentality is sells. It sells really, really well. I think, like, I agree though that the books do have some anti-war themes, but I would not call it a fully anti-war book. I mean,
yeah.
As we've talked about in the past, You can't read things like Wyman Manderley's Vengeance and Justice. That's not fucking goddamn it. You can't read.
Oh, wow. Wait, hold on, you guys. Jeff has a new theory that Wyman Manderley and Doran Martell are the same person.
They're two heads of the same coin. I mean, actually,
They are.
The
So
two heads
you're
of the same coin
saying
are
that
like,
they are both from the Faceless Men and using their coin. That's what I heard you say.
I'm hanging up. No, but I mean, like in the same book of A Dance with Dragons, you have Ilaria Sand's speech about "Can I take a skull to bed with me?" That's also in the same book
Sure.
as Davos's speech in the Merman's Court and Wyman Manderley's speech about the North Remembers, and those two things are balanced in the books a little bit more here.
Yeah.
To kind of transition a little bit, there was one bullet that I especially wanted to talk about because this is one of my favorite kind of soapboxes here, in which user We Are Not Legion talks about the High Sparrow and the Faith Militant, and he says the High Sparrow and the Faith Militant really are just a bunch of religious fanatics out to disproportionately punish people for random petty reasons, and their uprising is completely unrelated to and he crosses this out, the war crimes of the Lannister regime, strikes that out, for any reasonable motive. And I do think like that is a legitimate grievance about the show, and that at first they were portrayed in season 5 as being like the people who were feeding the poor, the people who the High Sparrow is washing the feet of all the poor people in King's Landing. But immediately when they wanted to turn the audience against the Faith Militant and against the High Sparrow, they made them the people that were like breaking all the liquor. They were like pouring liquor onto the streets. They were imprisoning Loras Tyrell for being homosexual. They were doing things that they don't do in the books, and so they become like religious fanatics very, very quickly. Whereas George does a really good job, in my opinion, of having the Faith Militant occupying the role of having a very legitimate grievance against the Lannister regime, and all the stuff they do in the Riverlands all culminates in them all coming to King's Landing. And the other thing is too is they bring all the bones of all of the people from the religious septs that were all slaughtered by Lannister soldiers in the Riverlands, and they pile them up all around Baelor's Sept in A Feast for Crows, and that's a really powerful motivation. Now, one of the aspects that is very significant about them is that they're not a good organization. I mean, the High Sparrow is not a good guy. Like, he's very villainous, but he has a somewhat justified reason to be acting the way that he's acting, even if he starts engaging in misogyny against Cersei, particularly talking about her womanhood as being the reason why she's so wanton and wicked, and then, of course, marching her through the streets naked as well. So these are the actions of a villain here, but at the same time, the framework and the foundation are ones that you could come across as being somewhat justified.
Is womanhood not why I am wanton and wicked? But
That's up for you to decide.
I totally agree. Along with all of the actions and the imagery that the Faith Militant and the High Sparrow garb themselves with as sort of like political protests against the Lannisters, he like is straight up telling Cersei in their meeting, and he's like, yeah, and the time that you all pillaged the Riverlands, and he's like, no, she's like, no, the wolves did that, and he's like, no, that was you. That was you. And she's like, no, that wasn't us.
No.
Right. No, it is interesting because in the show, in the books, Cersei believes that she and the High Sparrow are playing this delicate game of like, political power, and we're going to arrest Marjorie together. And in the show, that is literally what happens.
Right.
In the books, she's just a huge idiot who misses him telling her, like, we don't like you. We're coming for you first chance we get. Like,
right.
I don't know. In the show, he's, I guess, there's this element of sort of like puritanical, religious fanaticism, and that's the only driving motivation, is that kind of social correction. You know, we have to stop the sinning and all that, but there's less of the the great sin of the Red Wedding, like that isn't really captured in the Faith Militant in the show, whereas in the books, I mean, it's not their core thing, but like that is a great symbol of their grievances, is the breaking of guest right, and that like shattering of the way things are supposed to be.
Well, I mean, the other aspect too that the High Sparrow brings up to Cersei is that you profane the steps of Baelor Sept by cutting off Ned Stark's head.
Yeah.
Here, So, and again, it kind of like changes the emphasis a little bit, in that the reader, they're going like, yeah, it's
That's
fucked
true.
up that they cut off Ned Stark's head altogether because you didn't have that one coming, guys. He really didn't have that one coming.
Right.
But
right.
the High Sparrow's like, look, we don't care if you kill Ned Stark. We care that you killed him on the steps of Baelor Sept. Like that's like the emphasis is there. And to be fair to the show, I think it would be really hard to kind of get into like the delicacies and the kind of intricacies of the negotiation, because there's the reason why Cersei goes to the High Sparrow in the first place is that she needs the High Sparrow to anoint him so that he is seen as to anoint Tommen as king of Westeros, and he needs that kind of symbol of legitimacy, and that's kind of a hard thing to kind of communicate in a show where you've got at that point 10 episodes a season and you're trying to cover not only Cersei Lannister's character but Jon, Sam, Daenerys, Tyrion, all the other persons they have to get through without this story.
I do think that while the social good, I guess, aspect of the Seven and the Faith Militant, etc., is lost in season 6, I wonder if they tried to bring some of that other perspective back in season 7, particularly with that first episode, because they are showing how the Seven and those who follow the Faith are kind of trying to bring that stability back to the Riverlands, which is something that the High Sparrow and his followers are doing, but also not doing in book 4. And we can see that this is something that's at the top of George's mind, that yes, it's in reaction to the war crimes of the Lannister regime, and you can see that this is something that will still come to the forefront of the story from how it plays out in Fire and Blood with the dance of the dragons. But in season 7, the first episode, they have Ian McShane's character there, who I guess is supposed to be but not but isn't Septon Mirabald. He's Brother Ray.
It's someone Brother Ray.
Brother Ray. He's Sugar Ray. And
he just wants to fly.
Yeah, he does. They're rebuilding a community and stuff, and then the outlaws come and fuck it all up because, again, realpolitik and wanton brutality all the way.
That's right. Nothing good ever happens.
So I just wanted to highlight one comment because I think it's hilarious, and it comes from Bojangles 1987, and that he says he realizes that if you started watching around season 4, that everything can be viewed from a Lannister basis. It explains damn near everything. The only exception really is Jon's transformation, and this is an extraordinarily spicy take. The only exception really is Jon's transformation into the bland Mary Sue of the show. Though I guess reducing him to a dumb sword swinger is kind of in view with the Lannister bias there. So, and then he continues on, it could not be more obvious who D&D's favorite characters are, well, except Jaime. They don't like Jaime. So, lots of spiciness in that comment.
That's very spicy. And also, I'm pretty sure that is exactly what Cersei thinks of Jon in book 4 when she's like trying to plan assassination. She's like, oh yeah, that dumbass. Like,
right.
That boy, he exists.
Yeah,
Let's undo that.
Yeah. Wow, that is a spicy comment. I'm going to think about that all night.
Do you ever not?
No, yeah. Bojangles, you are living in my head rent-free.
You rented some headspace there.
The next post comes from a user called Now Time Doth Waste Me, and the title is, What, You Egg? I'm just going to read the whole thing aloud. This is a pretty short post, all things considered. And Now Time Doth Waste Me writes, a small theory that George R. R. Martin might be referencing Shakespeare, in particular, this one line from Macbeth, recently posted on Our Shakespeare, you guys.
That's a thing for the latest Shakespeare news.
Yeah, he's got a new play coming out. Real jazz to see it. It's called Hamilton. In the scene when... It's not.
Oh.
In the scene when Macduff's family is being killed, one of the murderers grabs his son. The play has it written as, What, you egg? Stage direction says, stabs him. Young fry of treachery, and that's spoken by the first murderer. He has killed me, mother, by the son. Egg in this setting is meant to refer to his youth, a boy so young he has yet to quote-unquote hatch, aka grow into a man. Fry also means someone young. It's a word for a baby fish. I find the line interesting, especially in this setting. Egg had an innocence to him, a sweetness we all loved. Kill the boy within you. I told him the day I took ship for the wall. It takes a man to rule an egg on, not an egg. Kill the boy and let the man be born. Maester Aemon tells his brother Egg to kill the boy within him. He tells Jon Snow the same thing, and he soon gets stabbed like the boy in Macbeth. Not a huge revelation by any means, but it's always interesting how writers might be inspired by each other. Thought I'd share. Well, thank you for sharing. Now time doth waste me.
That was not wasted time at all. No. I like that. I mean, it is, I think, even without the Shakespearean context, you can have the kind of egg, and then you hatch into an eggon, like that whole thing kind of works. But
hatch into an egg with legs. An egg on something else.
But, in the context of the Shakespeare line, I guess, of course George has read this. He's familiar with the Scottish play. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me too much if he was like, maybe he was Google searching context related words and just searched kill, egg, boy, and found this Shakespeare line and was like, oh, this is a good one. I'm gonna reference it. I'm gonna allude to this. No, I like it.
Yeah, you do get this sense that George loves referring to things that he loves himself. So Shakespeare, all of the different comic characters that he grew up reading about. But,
Football,
Bill Belichick.
Bill Belichick, specifically. Phil Sims.
Yeah. So George loves his references, and I enjoy them too. I don't feel that they detract from the story. I know that some people have some different opinions about that. But I did like the comment about George R. R. Martin as a Shakespeare fan from R. Newton 963, in which is the top comment, which he or she says, yeah, George R. R. Martin is a Shakespeare fan. Particularly, he said he quite liked Romeo and Juliet, which is why I think John and Danny will get together but end in tragedy. Now, we could save the last comment for a whole episode in of itself as we are progressing into Game of Thrones Season 8. But I think, Eliana, you actually got to speak with Mr. George R. R. Martin about Shakespeare back in the day at a little thing called Balticon.
Yes, I was at Balticon 2016, and I will never let anyone forget it. It's the crowning achievement of my life, listening to The Forsaken.
Yep. It's on my resume.
Yeah, I do put it on there, And yeah, so actually I did speak to George and I asked him what his favorite Shakespeare plays are. And he told me actually Julius Caesar and Richard III. George in particular is a big fan of the histories, surprising no one. Yeah, and I think you recently had Shakespeare of Thrones on your cast, right, Jeff, to talk about how Julius Shakespeare as a play. Wow, what the fuck? But Julius Caesar.
Julius Shakespeare.
Maybe I shouldn't have had this other drink. How Julius Caesar manifests within A Song of Ice and Fire. And there are multiple ways in which it does. And, Richard III, George has spoken openly about how much it influences him. And it's no surprise that if he's so moved by Richard III that he would be inclined to include characters like Macbeth in his story. Obviously there's some of those vibes with Stannis and Melisandre. If you ever get a chance, I did go to watch Richard III, and I was watching, I was like, fuck, dude, when does everyone stop dying? Y'all think that A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones is very brutal and bloody and people keep dying? I was like, when does everyone stop dying in Richard III? Okay. And apparently this really happened. So
yeah. Yeah, that's a rave review. If you like Game of Thrones, you will enjoy. Well,
if
enjoy?
You like it because people die for some reason, if that is the thing that you find compelling, perhaps you too would like Richard III.
Yeah, is it the history too behind it? I mean, the Wars of the Roses and the rise of Richard III is So yeah, I've been listening to a few history podcasts, and one of the ones I listened to is one called Tides of History, and they had a great 2-part series about the Wars of the Roses. And you can really see, George has talked to numerous times about how the Wars of the Roses are one of the inspirations for A Song of Ice and Fire. But when you get into like the granular details of the Wars and the Roses, you kind of see you can see a lot of the stuff that George does, especially in A Game of Thrones, is very much based on real history. And in my opinion, my spicy take for the night is that it's not as much based on real history as much as it's based on something like Richard III. Like George's conception of the Wars of the Roses is filtered through a cultural lens of Shakespeare, and I think that's good and sometimes bad in some ways in terms of how sometimes history is understood by the modern audience. But I can leave those comments for another time because that's another spicy take to talk about much more at some other point.
I will say, so I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to bring us all back to this post, not through what I'm saying, but just because we should probably talk about it. But if there's anything that Richard III taught me, it's that you can, in fact, introduce your hero in the 4th act. I was like, oh, okay. So there was no setup for this person. I mean, I guess the setup was what in the previous plays, but like, who's gonna watch the whole Henriette? No one. Anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
you could. It's basically the same as what sitting down to watch all of the Lord of the Rings movies. I guess people do that, or all of the one Star Wars trilogy. But anyway, so one of the comments in here from the_injog says, "I think that's a great catch, and it also makes me wonder if fry was used in Shakespeare's time as it is today to mean like to fry an egg, as in cook." And then OP responds with, "Probably Shakespeare was a master of puns and double entendre, so I would definitely wouldn't be surprised." And yeah, the injog comes back and goes, and at least according to Google, fry means all of the above, at least since Middle English, so good stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. I like that.
Yeah.
Frying an egg,
And
which is something we have used in the past to refer to dead Aegons. So,
true.
yeah, frying an egg.
And I mean, George is playing around with those words. Eggs are many things, but he does it in things like Melisandre's vision of, "I ask the Lord of Light to show me Azor Ahai." I'm not saying this verbatim. And she's like, "And he only shows me snow." And we see that from the capital S.
Snow,
That-
Ned.
Exactly. That might be what he's talking about, or she's talking about, but there's wordplay there.
Wordplay, for sure. Yep. George R. R. Martin likes wordplay. And he likes fried eggs.
Does he?
Pretty sure he's a big fan of Huevos Rancheros.
Is he?
Yes, he is.
Is this canon?
I
I'm
am
wondering. I'm being very
almost
serious.
positive that's an actual fact.
That is an
I
actual
can-
fact, yes.
Wait, where's
Good.
that cited? I really actually want to know now. Did you make this up? I'm very
I mean,
gullible.
I'm fairly sure
I
it's
will
true.
effort this while you guys are talking.
I am wondering if it's from the Sibel video, but it's probably not. A video which everyone should watch, by the way, which is George R. R. Martin and Sibel Kekili hanging out in Santa Fe. George shows her his miniatures collection. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there in that video. Are we all Googling Gurn
I'm looking for
Huevos
Ranchero.
Rancheros? Fans, ass waffles, if you know of the reference where George R. R. Martin says he likes Huevos Rancheros, or if you have a way to get in touch with George R. R. Martin and ask his opinion on Huevos Rancheros, please do. This next post was really more of a discussion question, but some really rich discussion came from it. It was kind of a fun topic to talk about. This was posted by user Lenny Degg, who asked,
Degg?
"Who?" Degg, Lenny Degg. I dreamed that I was old. Who asked, "Who would Rob have married if Ned didn't go south?" Which is kind of a fun hypothetical question. I like it when hypothetical topics come up. They suggest someone from House Manderley or Karstark, or maybe looking as far afield as Marjorie Tyrell, which, if you've ever played the Clash of Kings mod, is the power move when you start with the Crowned Stag bookmark, is marrying Rob to Marjorie right away. But there's a lot of good comments with some interesting suggestions. The top one from user Elaine Moonstone, who we like, is is suggesting that it could be Mira Reed, because she's close to Rob's age, good friends with Ned and Howland are good friends. The neck is a vital choke point strategically, and the Starks and the Reeds haven't intermarried in the last 150 years, so like they're due. She also suggests Yasila Royce, who I did not remember was a person, but the Royces and the Starks have intermarried. Ned and Jan Royce are obviously on good terms because Ned grew up in the Vale. It would be a good connection to the Vale. So there's some really interesting thoughts in this thread. There's a lot of other good comments too, but I wanted to throw it to you guys and see if you saw anything that stuck out to you, or if you had any hot takes on who Robb could have married.
I like Kami Slayer 1389's suggestion of Alice Karstark, and not just because of the username. I like the
oh, that guy, yeah.
No, I like the idea of the Karstarks because Alice Karstark is interesting, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe she ends up showing up, or is she in the appendices before A Dance with Dragons?
Oh, that's a good question.
No.
She is first mentioned in the Storm appendix, I think, or in Storm.
Yeah, she's not in the Game of Thrones appendix.
Yeah, they just have
No.
Rickard Karstark, Lord of Carhold,
Yeah.
where you hold your
Yeah.
cars.
The car park.
The
yeah,
garage,
It's like
if you will.
like a casino, like a Hold'em.
The garage.
Karstark, Hold'em, yeah. But yeah, so Alice Karstark would be a really good choice, I think. I think because, as we find out in A Game of Thrones, Rickard Karstark and Robb Stark, they don't really get along all that well. Shocking, as you're going to find out, because of two of Rickard Karstark's sons are killed in battle. Torrin and Eddard Karstark are the ones who were killed, and his other son Harrion Karstark is taken captive by the Lannisters at the Battle of the Green Fork. So what is a better way to soothe Rickard Karstark than to marry his sole surviving daughter, Alice Karstark? And I think it's interesting too that she's, and you guys can have your takes on this, but I think she has a very strong Lyanna vibe when I read her in A Dance with Dragons, when she shows up in Jon's chapters. Almost a kind of Arya-like vibe as well, in terms of her being characterized as a girl on a dying horse, and similar to Lyanna and her riding horses throughout the North. These are ways. So I think Alice Karstark, who I maybe partially am being colored because I love her to death. I think she's a fantastic character in Dance itself. But I think that she would probably be the best choice within the North. Now, Catelyn makes the point in Storm, I want to say, maybe a Clash of Kings. I think it's in Storm of Swords. That Robb maybe could have been a contender for Marjorie's hand in marriage. And if Marjorie and Robb get together, then the war is all but won at that point, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. What's interesting about Alice is that she was at one point engaged to the Hornwood heir. But he dies at Whispering Wood, and so it would have been a really interesting move. Like, this is deviating from the original question, but like post Whispering Wood, for Robb to soothe things with the Karstarks by getting betrothed to Al. Obviously, that relies on the phrase not having their arrangement, but in a perfect world,
right?
Alice Karstark, I think, would be a good partner for Robb too, just character wise. At least that's the feeling I get. Also, before I forget, Texas Car Hold'em is...
There we go.
Always holding a dead man's hand.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, really up the river.
Literally, up the white knife, right? That's the very end of the white knife.
That's right, yeah.
God damn.
Okay.
So, I will say,
So-
if you are a person who likes soft things, as I will
I
phrase
like
it,
where this is going.
I kind of like Jaden Snow's comment where they think it would have been Daisy Mormont. I don't think that is likely politically, but I like the idea of it because I think that there's kind of an implication that Daisy seems to have maybe like had a crush on Robb. I don't know if that's true or not, but she was cool and I like Daisy. That's it. You like soft things.
That's fair. She's older than him, but that's not like she's not old. Like she's like 6 years older or
I mean,
something.
she's
It's
old
a little
enough
weird,
that
but
I'm like, y'all are in different phases of your life, but
it's true. It would be weird. I guess she is basically like a senior in college, and he's like a junior in high school.
Freshman.
So
He's a freshman in high school.
he is
Yeah,
like 14, isn't he?
it's
Oh,
like
boy.
Rhaegar and Lyanna, and I'm like, that's
Yeah.
not okay.
Oh,
that
but
age
what if
gap?
Daisy? What if Daisy was the Rhaegar to Rob's
Ooh,
Lyanna?
Then
wow.
they still die anyway.
I really liked the comment way further down the thread with way fewer upvotes than the ones we've been talking about by nfriend4, which is probably Renly. Ned had a thing for Baratheons.
And then that was one too.
Yeah, seems unlikely. Someone suggested Asha as well.
I thought that it would be smart if Balon did agree, which is highly unlikely. But I do think
no.
I think it's a smart choice. Why are you saying no, Jeff? Is it because Asha is your girlfriend?
Well, no, she's my mistress.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ariane's my girlfriend.
Who's your wife? Which one's your wife then?
I don't know.
I thought one of these was your wife. Tell us
Asha's
about
kind of the side piece. Ariane's like the main,
Tell us about your AU, Jeff.
I don't think I should go any farther than what I've already done right now.
Great. This is the fan casting we were talking about.
That's exactly.
There are some suggestions that it could have still been Marcella.
Yeah. Which I do see as possible. I mean, like, Robert was really into that. I did actually try and float this recently. So one of my best friends just got out of a very long relationship, and I floated the prospect of
So
my
they're single.
partner's boyfriend. My partner's brother. Oh, wow. Sorry, let me try this over. So my best friend got out of a really long relationship recently, and I floated the possibility of like my partner's brother, because I was like, then like, eventually we'd be like related. And out of all the prospects that I floated to her, this is actually the most enticing to her solely because of the possibility of being semi-related. So it's strong enough for Robert, I guess.
It's
compelling.
a thing, sure.
Yeah.
I get it. And I mean, it does kind of make sense. Like if you're going for that Southron ambitions, kind of like tying all the dynasties together idea, it makes sense to connect them a little more strongly. Although if Sansa's already going to marry Joffrey, then maybe Robb doesn't have to marry Marcella. But here's he could have been betrothed to Ariane.
Oh.
No.
Jump again in his AU. No.
That's right.
It ain't happening. I mean,
Get that kid out of here. No, she's older than him by a lot.
So I mean, if you're doing like Southern Ambitions or something like that again, I mean, I could see Ariane as being a possibility for Robb. I mean, they're sort of similar ages. She's 21, 22 years old, or she's 23, and Robb. So there's still a bit of an age gap there, 9 years as opposed to 6 years.
Oh God.
Well, it would have been less than that. If she's 23 by 300 AC, Robb would have been
16 or
Yeah.
17.
I probably
Yeah.
I am probably 17. It's still a lot. You're right.
It's a lot. It's a few
not
years,
9.
but I mean, like, so one of the ideas in Southern Ambitions is that the reason why you have like Ned Stark dancing with Ashara Dane at the tourney of Harrenhal is that Lord Rickard Stark was attempting to set the Danes up with the Starks so that you can kind of undercut the Dornish support for the Iron Throne by marrying the Starks in with the secondary house in Dorne. So I mean, that could work in that context there of an Arianne Robb Stark match or someone like that. I think Marcella is probably the more likely choice. I mean, Littlefinger even kind of says as much to Ned in Eddard 13, where he says, yeah, just marry your boy to Marcella and marry your daughter to Tommen and marry your other daughter and marry Sansa to Joffrey and everything will be fine. So I think, I don't know, I guess in an alternate universe, that would be the way it would go down if we didn't have the plot of a Game of Thrones.
Right, sure.
Yeah. Also as big of an age gap, but it just seems likely that I guess Robert would have pushed it.
Or Cersei.
Yeah. I can see Ned though still saying no and being like, no, you have one of my kids.
I'm still going with Alice Karstark.
Alice Karstark. Okay, final answer. We didn't even talk about Mira really, but I mean, I think there's Elaine Moonstone has made all of our strong points.
As she often does. All right, so our penultimate post here is a very highly upvoted post on the subreddit that came out on March 30th from user Yald.
Y'all.
Y-A-U-L-D. Yald. Best be reading this post. Yeah.
You've been in the South recently, haven't you?
I have actually been in the South recently.
There's
So
half
the
a
title of this-
president buried there, as they say.
As they say. So the title of this post is "The Waif Does Not Exist," or How D&D Forgot Their Own Faceless Men plotline. So I feel like I've been taking the kind of shit on the show role in this Maester Monthly podcast episode. But this post here is talking about the role of the waif and the faceless men. So at the end of season 5, or in season 5 itself, we're introduced to the character of the waif, which is a character we also see in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons and Arya's storyline. And she's of a similar age and height to Arya, and those are kind of curious, right? And they establish a few things in season 5, and that she seemingly is the only other faceless man that's in the House of Black and White besides Jaqen, the only one that Arya encounters there. And then we get some more information, things like that the Jaqen that Arya encounters in the House of Black and White is not the same Jaqen that she encountered in the Riverlands, and that they're only wearing those faces in order to make Arya comfortable. And this is, something that becomes very, very important in the climax to Arya's storyline in season 5. So then we're talking about their roles in the story. The waif in the story has the kind of the bad cop role to Jaqen's good cop role. And these are all points that Yald is making in his or her post. And we get like some more things about, at the very end of the storyline where Jaqen Hagar, or the character that's wearing Jaqen Hagar's face, drinks the poison, and Arya thinks that he was her friend, but the waif comes up and says, no, he wasn't your friend. He was no one. And that's kind of the climax to Arya's storyline, where she realizes that the faceless men in the story are not the same ones that she encountered. They're not her friends. And the other thing that's really important too is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're like taking the faces off of Arya at the end of the storyline is taking the faces off of Jaqen. She's seeing all these different faces that the character was wearing or the person was wearing. And that is important, right? Because what's being communicated to Arya is that these characters are no one, that she needs to become no one, that this person isn't Jaqen, isn't the same character she knew in the Riverlands, and that's important. Until season 6, because then all that climactic scene of those faces being stripped off, it goes nowhere, because the waif is not really a character per se in terms of Arya's storyline, in so much as that she's not like a real character in the sense that she's, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. She's not a real character in the sense that she has multiple faces and multiple personalities and multiple identities, all related to crafting Arya into a faceless man. But in season 6, she becomes the waif, as the antagonist to Arya becomes the focal point of her story. So the point that Yald is making here is that the waif does not exist in season 5, and that's the important point being conveyed to Arya. But in season 6, she becomes a character in her own right, and she harbors a massive vendetta against Arya, and she is the one who is seemingly very emotional about Arya leaving the Faceless Men and going astray from the Faceless Men teachings, which would seem in contrast to the character that was built up in season 5. So this post, as of right now, has 1,863 upvotes. So it's a very, very highly upvoted post, and I think it's a really fascinating, great post that is pulling together something that I had not seen previously when I was watching the previous seasons of Game of Thrones.
I don't know. I had never really made sense of the Faceless Men plot in the show, and honestly just kind of wrote it off as not something worth puzzling through. And I think this is probably wise, because it does feel like two different stories in season 5 and season 6, where in season 5, by the end, we've sort of been shown that the waif is really just like a training device. The waif is a simulation for Arya to be
right.
pitted against. But then in season 6, the waif is just like, I don't know, a jerk. Like she goes to the Cobra Kai martial arts she's the bad sports character to Arya's good sports character. Yeah, I don't know. That disconnect really kind of you feel it, and it makes you less interested because there's no point in investing the thought that that Yald invests in this post, because it doesn't really pay off.
Yeah, and there is a way that they could have played it, right? That makes it still feel like it's a systemic catch amongst the faceless men that she can't leave, as opposed to making it this personal vendetta from the waif. Like, they could have played it a little more horror movie-esque, right? Where you have like the waif popping up every now and then if like Arya's shows a whiff of thinking of leaving, as opposed to like her just showing up and being like mean. And then you have a similar device that you had at the end of season 5 where you are like, there's a bunch of Jockins because there are a bunch of faceless men and there's no single waif. And if you just like have a bunch of waifs just there creeping out Arya, it could have been accomplished. But it seems like as if the show, and I think this is a criticism a lot of people had of season 7 as well, seems to just want to pit Arya against other female rivals for some reason.
Ooh. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. And rather, like, yeah, there was an interesting way they could have done that, to have the House of Black and White pitting Arya against this constructed female, like, you know, there's a really cool like Westworld-esque meta-narrative thing they could have done.
Yeah.
But that's not what they did. And, you know, like, what you're describing sounds a lot like what they did with Pyat Pri in season 2. Like, having all the warlocks be this, you know, they all look the same and they step out of the shadows and assassinate the 13. You know, like all that kind of creepy duplicate stuff. It would actually be kind of cool to see Arya having to deal with that. With like, I don't know, an army of waifs. She comes into the basement and all of the faceless men turn around and they all look like the waif. That would be pretty spooky.
I mean, I think when we look back at like season 6, I mean, you guys remember this, like all the theorizing about like who the waif is and who's the one character who Lady
Crane.
Lady Crane, yeah. Lady Crane is a faceless man, because people are trying to make sense of the story, and I think subconsciously people still have the ideas from season 5 in mind that, you know, the waif is no one. The waif doesn't actually have any identity. That her role in the story is as a mentor figure to Arya to make her forget her own identity. So all of that is subconsciously in people's mind when they're watching season 6 and they're trying to make sense of the plot line and trying to make it more along the lines of possibly the way that George will draw Arya's storyline in The Winds of Winter on Into a Dream of Spring. Now, we know that George has written a lot of material for Arya in Bravos for The Winds of Winter itself. And I do think there is going to be some sort of break between her and the Faceless Men in The Winds of Winter itself. But I don't think it's going to be necessarily as straightforward as we saw in the story. I mean, what does season 6 essentially end with? It ends with Arya in Bravos having killed the waif and then mounting her head onto the wall of faces there, and then she says that I am Arya Stark, Arya of Winterfell, and yeah, that's cool. It's a cool line and all, but at the same time, you're like, the payoff is fine, but the build up to the payoff doesn't net that kind of payoff, if that makes sense.
Yes. No. Yeah. Definitely. It. Yeah. The really wild mysticism in season 5 of the House of Black and White doesn't really pay off because it's just a training level for Arya. Like there wasn't any substance there, as it turns out. They created a good illusion of substance, I think, in season 5, and then like really just showed the cardboard cutouts after that. Yeah, it is too bad because I think part of it too is like season 5 ends with that big moment of all the faces flinging around and stuff, and coming into season 6, you want, with the faceless men, as like with this new kind of adversarial relationship Arya has with them, you want some fuckery with like, oh, this person's really a faceless man. Like, you want that kind of unexpected twist, because you actually they get to do it. They could get away with like, this person was a faceless man the whole time.
Right.
It's like a free get out of jail free card, but instead they just have random old lady number 7 be the faceless man the whole time, and it's the waif stabbing Arya on a bridge. Like, when you have this cool identity story, how do you not make a character who's an antagonist for Arya who has a fake identity? Like any kind of fake identity. The waif is just the waif and runs through Bravos as the waif.
Right.
And it's just kind of weird of like, how did you get into this order if you have all this like personal hate when the whole point of the order was like, we're going to erase you of all that? Like, how did this all go so wrong for you?
Yeah.
And she's never like chastised or like punished for having such a personal vendetta against Arya. Like Jaqen, or the character playing Jaqen, or the person wearing Jaqen's face, however you want to like delineate it.
Mm-hmm.
Never is like, you need to go back to your training. Maybe you're not where you need to be as a faceless man because you're harboring so much hatred and so much emotion and feeling here about this girl. It's time for you to kind of go backwards in training and relearn what it means to be a faceless man, sort of thing. And maybe that's like an interesting way that you attack the narrative there, that the waif is the one who's going rogue on the faceless man, in addition to Arya going rogue as well there, because she can't get over her own feelings about that Arya's being promoted too quickly and that Arya will usurp her place in the House of Black and White. I mean, that's kind of attempting to fix something that was written back in 2015 and then was shown on the screen in 2016. But we're here and we're available for hire for prequel shows, HBO. So that's all we're trying to say.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
I will say, just to keep harping on it, it does, going back to that horror stuff, it does lose, and the waif is, of course, a different character from who she is in the books, but part of what was so unsettling about the waif wasn't that she was a scary, mean antagonist. Part of what was so scary about her was that she was very placid. She's like, yeah, I'm 36. I speak a bunch of languages. I've been here for a while, and I look like I'm like 8. Like, oh, okay. That's cool.
I mean, I like the line game that they play. I think that's a really interesting thing they do in Arya's storyline in A Feast for Crows, on into A Dance with Dragons, and that's cool and interesting. But again, the same thing that we talked about for how Game of Thrones in later seasons is essentially like the Lannister version of the story. How easy is that to portray on screen and maintaining the interest of people who are watching it? I don't know. I think it would be interesting, but I don't. But someone at some point was probably like, we're not really going to go in quite the same direction George R. R. Martin went with for Arya's storyline, A Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons. We'll keep like the broad strokes here, but a lot of the more intricate plot points, we're going to go a little bit sideways on it.
I think what we're saying is that Cersei really wanted to just see Arya fight the waif on screen. And she wrote a letter
Again
to David Benioff.
Wanton brutality. That's what.
The word wanton has come up several times now.
Maybe. Yeah. Never mind.
That's because I'm wanting to move on to the next post.
Wow!
Our next post is brought to us by user CatGirlApocalypse, and it was posted on the 1st of April, the year of our Lord 2019. The title of the post is, "Listening to the audiobook has made me hate Eddard Stark and myself." This post was reported several times by morons who don't understand good posts. No, it's a long, effortful post that was... the TLDR is April Fool's. But it's basically just ragging on Ned. One of the choice sentences right at the end is literally the only okay thing this guy did was try to talk Robert out of having a little girl killed out of a psychotic grudge, and he basically forgot about that after the argument anyway. And that's sort of the tone of the entire thing. But I think buried in this post are some good points, some really great points. And in particular, I wanted to highlight a comment from CatGirlApocalypse, which I think could stand on its own as its own post. Someone had said somewhere in the comments, the only reason Ned's plan failed was because Sansa warned Cersei unintentionally.
Wrong.
And CatGirlApocalypse goes, is it though? And then just lays down some gospel. The point being that Ned not only went to Cersei and told her what he was going to do, he basically set her up in a no-win scenario and then offered really not much sympathy for her, actually. Despite all of his kind of, his trying to prevent child murder and all this kind of stuff, he still tells her that, like, yeah, I think you're basically subject to a death sentence, but I'll give you like a free out on this one.
Give you a head start to run.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's which actually kind of sounds like a Ramsey thing to do. Not to loop the characters in here too much, but
wow, Michael.
I'm just saying, and I think Catgirl Apocalypse has some really good points in here. I want to quote one in particular, which is they say, shit, she kind of poured out her heart to him in this Godswood scene. That felt like the first genuine conversation that Cersei had with anyone but Jaime in her adult life. It probably felt good to just be straight with someone about it. And Ned doesn't really meet her there. Like, he's still super self-righteous about it, which, I mean, she did a horrible thing, but I don't know. It's an interesting point about Ned's, I don't know if I can find the right word for it. Almost like sanctimoniousness. I don't know.
I mean, self-righteous, I think, is a good word. The way you put it before.
Self-righteousness. Yeah. They sum it up by saying, yeah, she's a monster. Maybe she even deserves to die, but she didn't deserve that. So I don't know. The whole post is fascinating and hilarious, but that comment in particular I wanted to highlight. What were y'all's thoughts on this?
It's a weird scene, though, like the Godswood scene. I agree with what Catgirl Apocalypse is saying. Like, I am taken aback when Ned throws Cersei's words that she says when Robert strikes her in her face. Like, that's pretty rude. And he's still, like, out here being like, man, I'm really sad about Robert. I'm like, is he worth it, though? No. But the reason why it's a weird scene is because Ned is coming to the table, and part of his self-righteousness is he thinks Cersei and Jaime plotted to kill Jon Arryn, and Cersei doesn't deny having killed Jon Arryn. But when Ned says, "I know the secret that Jon Arryn died for," or "I know why he died," Cersei's more or less like, "Oh, do you? Please tell me. I'd love to know." Because
right.
And it sounds weird, right? It sounds like she's being sarcastic, like, "Oh, do you? Well, I do too." And it's like, I think Cersei's like, "Oh, really? Because I too would like to know why the fuck that guy died and my life fucking blew up." Okay, it has caused me lots of grief these past few weeks with you running up in here, and it's a strange scene because that, as we all know, Cersei and Jaime did not kill Jon Arryn.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good point. Yeah. Although I would add an appendix to that where Cersei does kind of think that Pycelle helped Jon Arryn die. Right? Like, there's I feel like there's this chain of, like, Cersei knew that Pycelle wasn't doing much to help Jon Arryn, and Pycelle was doing that to try and make Cersei happy, but neither of them were actually responsible for poisoning Jon Arryn. Like,
there's a breakdown in the bureaucratic communication.
Exactly. Yeah.
The paperwork did not flow.
No.
That's so interesting because, when Tyrion confronts Pycelle about that in A Clash of Kings, Pycelle's like, she couldn't tell me, but she wanted it to happen. She knew he had to die. And you're like, well, do you think this is maybe something you want to run past Cersei? Maybe a little bit. Maybe like kind of talk it out a little bit. Figure out that's like the intent behind everything. And granted, I think that Cersei probably did want Jon Arryn to die, but she wasn't the one who was poisoning. Wasn't the one specifically behind Jon Arryn's poisoning itself.
Right.
Now, I think I think that Catgirl makes some fantastic points in this comment as well. And that, Ned doesn't come across super great here. But at the same time, I feel like I'm going to have to defend Ned here. I feel like that Ned has just broken the case open. He thinks he's broken the case open about why Jon Arryn was poisoned. But he has broken the case open about the truth behind the parentage of Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella.
And Bran's attempted murder.
And Bran's attempted murder, too, yeah. Because Cersei says as much. She says that he saw us. He was watching us. I can understand why Ned might be like a little bit taken aback and kind of throw some shade at Cersei, even though it's kind of inappropriate because also Ned was just witness to Robert striking Cersei when he woke up from his fever dream in Eddard 10. That's, I mean, and there's a weirdness in that too, in that Ned doesn't make any like emotional reaction to Robert hitting Cersei in that chapter as well, until like he brings it up again with her. It's like an insult. And you're like, that is just, I don't know. Like Ned's a good guy, but Ned.
He brings it up not with her, but I think he brings it up with Robert in terms of like he it's not that he asks how often it happens, but it does come up and Robert's like, this has not happened that many times before, but it has happened before, and Ned does give a sort of indication of disapproval.
Well, and that brings me, yeah. So that reminds me that Ned, when he first sees Cersei in the Godswood, he sees that the bruise has kind of turned discolored, and he like reaches up and touches her face and is like, has he done this before, sort of thing. And Cersei's like, once or twice, and then she quickly changes the subject around there. So Ned does offer something resembling empathy for a moment, but then he kind of throws those words that Cersei gives to Robert back into her face there.
Yeah, I forgot what it was with Robert, if he said that same thing. I know he just says something like that was not kingly or whatever, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the idea that it is, though, Ned essentially in many ways laying out his plans to Cersei. Which I think is I think it's part of what Catgirl Apocalypse is pushing back on here, that it's not solely Sansa. George R. R. Martin will say that Sansa has a part in it, but she's not the only piece in that puzzle. That Ned is very much a part of it, and this scene is a big part of that.
Yeah. Definitely.
I mean, go ahead.
There's a good point that Catgirl makes, which is that, you know, even if Ned really truly was willing to just let Cersei and the kids walk away, he knew what kind of man Stannis was. Like, he knew what he was, you know, like Robert and Stannis, the Baratheons, were not going to let Cersei walk away. And he had to have known that because he knows these guys. And so to say that this is criticizing Ned, I think really takes it too simply. Like, it's a wonderfully complex scenario, which is why it's such a rich and cool story. But it's an interesting question of like Ned almost abdicating his responsibility a little bit by saying, "You guys just leave. Like, I'll let the Lannisters and the Baratheons fight about it, but you get to run away this time. Like, I'm not going to be the one who starts it. I'll let them start it." And maybe that's honor, maybe that's like a form of like avoidance or something. You know, it's I think it's an open question.
Agreed.
I think in terms of hypotheticals, right, since we did have one of those earlier on in this episode, there is, of course, a hypothetical. Like, there's no denying that Ned, had Robert come back hale and healthy and not dying, was going to tell Robert that, hey, so Cersei's been cheating on you this whole time with her brother. None of the kids are yours.
Yep.
But of course, there's an argument that Ned might have stayed to try and be Robert and potentially even Stannis' conscience and talk them off the ledge of, hey, let's kill all the kids, the way that he did for Daenerys.
Yeah, but Ned at the same time has to know that Robert's reaction is going to be the same as it was with Daenerys. That he knows that Robert is going to call for their deaths, and there's nothing that he can do as Hand of the King to save these kids. That's the terrible problem that Ned is in, is that there's no easy answers for him here. Does he let this kind of great crime like rise up and allow someone like Joffrey to take the throne? Or does he or does he try and trust Robert in his mercy? And that's, he tries to weave a middle way there, and he tries to give Cersei some time to run the fuck out of King's Landing, but that's ultimately, I mean, Ned himself even concludes to Cersei that Robert will chase you to the ends of the earth. So get out as quickly as you can and try to get far, far away, and you'll never have to stop running, sort of thing.
Yeah, or she could just run away, and he has that threat hanging over her and doesn't take it. But maybe Ned really only has it in himself to hide and lie for one secret bastard, or not bastard. He only has it in himself to lie so much.
Yeah,
That's true. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a line in the parent post, which is of course a little hyperbolic. It's an April Fool's post.
It's a what?
But it's an April Jape.
Oh.
Yeah. It was on April Japes Day. And Catgirl points out, Cersei painfully confesses to Ned that Robert beats her, rapes her, and treats her like shit. And Ned is like, I don't know which one of you to pity more. And Catgirl says, okay, Ned, how about the domestic abuse victim?
I mean, it's true.
And I mean, it's not, they're not necessarily wrong. Like I said, there's some hyperbole there, but the equating Robert beating and abusing Cersei to Cersei cuckolding Robert is a really fraught, there's a lot of baked in toxic masculinity in there, I think, in an interesting way. I mean, they're both bad things, but to have Ned see them as equivalently bad, I don't know. I'm not trying to take a moral stance on cuckolding, but it's just, I don't know. It really makes me think.
That's what the Song of Ice and Fire is all about.
That's why Robert Baratheon doesn't deserve your sympathy as much as you give it to him.
Agreed.
Well, I think that about does it. Those were the only good posts in the last month and a half, couple months. It's been pseudo monthly since the last time we posted. If you like Maester Monthly, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Acast, and of course YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Maester Monthly. You should probably, I just want to suggest this as a friend, as someone who respects you. I would recommend that you try smashing a little bit of that MF and like button. Just a bit. just want to hedge that one. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to everyone on Reddit who created such great posts. There was a lot more that we did not talk about and could not talk about. Thank you, of course, to Garten Martin for writing the books. I have been one of your hosts, Bookshelf Stud, also known as Michael.
And I am the other one of your hosts, Glass Table Girl, also known as Eliana. Did I do that right? Is it supposed to be my username first?
I switched it up, so who knows?
Okay.
And I have been one of your guest hosts for this episode, Brenda Beefish, a.k.a. Jeff. Thanks for having me, guys. Had a lot of fun.
Oh, it was a pleasure, as always. It was pretty much a pleasure. It was mostly a pleasure. It was
mostly.
It was fine. It was good. As I said, thank you, everyone, for listening. We will catch you next time. Bye.